The Nexari Collective had spent 300 years perfecting them. Commander, Lisa Grant stood alone on the observation deck of the starship Starfall and watched the cargo shuttle slowly dock with their vessel. The metal clamps locked into place with a heavy thud that echoed through the hull. Her crew had received the distress signal 4 days ago from a derelict Nexari research station floating at the edge of contested space. Nobody had expected to find anything alive out there. The Nexari had abandoned that sector months ago when the war shifted to other fronts. But something had been transmitting a weak emergency beacon, and regulations demanded they investigate. What they found there had changed everything. Humanity thought it knew about the war. Lisa pressed her palm flat against the cold viewport glass. The stars outside were distant and uncaring. The same stars that had watched humanity crawl out of Earth and spread across the galaxy. The same stars that had witnessed the beginning of the war with the Nexari Collective 7 years ago. Now those stars watched as Lisa made a decision that could end her career or save something precious. She was not sure which outcome was more likely. Her science officer, Daniel Cooper, entered the observation deck with a tablet clutched tightly in his hands. He was a thin man with nervous eyes and a brilliant mind, and right now those nervous eyes were wider than Lisa had ever seen them. "Biological containment field is holding steady," he reported. His voice was tight with barely concealed unease. "All 12 specimens are alive and stable. Dr. Amy Sullivan is monitoring their vital signs from the medical bay." Lisa did not turn from the viewport. 12, yes, Commander. 12. 12 creatures engineered in Nexari laboratories with one singular purpose programmed into every cell of their bodies: the extinction of human life. Intelligence reports had called them synths, short for synthetic biological weapons. They were the Collective's masterpiece of warfare, created in hidden facilities far from the front lines. Their neural architecture had been designed to identify human DNA signatures across impossible distances. Their claws could shred through standard combat armor, like paper. Their venom was specifically calibrated to shut down human nervous systems within minutes of exposure, and now 12 of them sat in her cargo hold. Because their creators had abandoned them to die. The research logs we recovered from the station's database, Daniel continued, pulling up holographic data on his tablet, indicate the project was terminated approximately 6 months ago. Budget reallocation to conventional weapons programs. The Nexari High Command decided that traditional warships were more cost-effective than biological weapons. He paused and swallowed hard. They just left them there, Commander. Locked the doors and walked away. Lisa finally turned from the viewport. Left them to starve. They were eating the station's maintenance drones when we found them. Small robotic units meant for cleaning and repairs. The specimens had figured out how to hunt them through the ventilation system. Daniel's voice dropped lower. The youngest ones were in critical condition. Severe malnutrition. Dr. Sullivan says another week and they would have started dying. Lisa closed her eyes and remembered what she had seen through the containment field's shimmer. When they first brought the specimens aboard, despite everything she knew about what they were built for, she could not shake the image from her mind. The way the larger specimens had positioned themselves protectively around the smaller ones. The way their 4 luminescent eyes had watched her approach with something more than predatory instinct. There had been fear in those eyes. There had been hope. "Command wants them destroyed," Lisa said. It was not a question. Daniel nodded slowly. "Flash incineration orders came through an hour ago on the priority channel. Admiral Harrison says they are too dangerous to study and too unpredictable to contain long term. He wants confirmation of termination within 24 hours. Lisa walked to the center of the observation deck and stood beneath the great dome of transparent aluminum that showed the endless void above. 20 years she had served in the fleet, 20 years of following orders without question. She had fought in the Proxima campaign and watched her first ship burn in the darkness. She had led boarding parties onto Nexari vessels and done things that still haunted her dreams. She had lost friends and found new ones and lost them again. War had taught her that survival required hard choices, but she kept thinking about those eyes. "The youngest one," she said slowly. The one Dr. Sullivan said was in critical condition. What is its status now? Daniel hesitated. He looked down at his tablet and then back up at his commander. Dr. Sullivan has been monitoring them continuously since we brought them aboard. She says the juvenile's vitals stabilized once we got nutrients into it. It is recovering faster than expected. She says it has been trying to communicate. Lisa felt something shift in her chest. Communicate how? Mimicking sounds. Learning words? Dr. Sullivan thinks they might be significantly more intelligent than the Nexari research report suggested. She's requesting permission to continue observation before we carry out the termination order. She believes there is something important here that we do not yet understand. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Through the viewport, she could see the cargo shuttle now fully secured to the Starfall's hull. Somewhere inside that shuttle, 12 creatures waited to learn if they would live or die. Creatures built to kill her and everyone she loved. Creatures that had watched their creators walk away and leave them in the dark. Tell Dr. Sullivan she has 48 hours, Lisa said at last. Full observation privileges. I want detailed reports on behavior, communication attempts, social interactions, everything. And I want it documented thoroughly. Daniel stared at her. Commander, the termination order, ... I am aware of the termination order, Lieutenant. I am choosing to delay it pending further investigation. If Admiral Harrison has a problem with that, he can come out here and deal with these specimens himself. She met Daniel's eyes with a steady gaze. These creatures were created to be weapons. But someone has to determine if that is all they are. Someone has to ask the question before we destroy the answer. Daniel nodded slowly. Something like respect flickered across his features. I will inform Dr. Sullivan immediately. He turned and left the observation deck. Lisa remained alone under the stars, thinking about war and weapons and the strange things that could grow in the spaces between violence and survival. 40-8 hours. That was all she could give them. She hoped it would be enough. Dr. Amy. Sullivan had dedicated her entire career to xenobiology, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this moment. She sat cross-legged on the cold, metal floor of the containment chamber with her back against the wall, and her hands resting open on her knees. The posture was deliberate. She had read somewhere that open palms signaled peace across dozens of alien species. She did not know if it would mean anything to creatures engineered in a laboratory, but she was willing to try anything at this point. The containment barrier hummed softly between her and the synths. It was a thin wall of energy that could vaporize organic matter in milliseconds if activated to full power. Protocol demanded that she keep it at maximum strength. Protocol also demanded full environmental suits, armed guards at every entrance, and emergency incineration systems on standby, in case the specimens broke free. Amy had dismissed all of it. The guards had argued with her. For 20 minutes before she pulled rank and sent them away, the environmental suits sat in a pile by the door. The incineration systems were powered down and locked with her personal code. If something went wrong in this room, Amy Sullivan would die before anyone could save her. She was counting on nothing going wrong. The juvenile. Synth sat 3 meters away from her on the other side of the barrier. It was the smallest of the 12 specimens, barely larger than a human child. Its body was vaguely serpentine, covered in scales that shifted color based on emotional state. Amy had spent the last 6 hours learning to read those colors. Blue meant curiosity. Yellow meant interest. Green meant contentment. Red meant fear or anger. Right now, the juvenile's scales rippled with soft blues and cautious yellows as it watched her with 4 luminescent eyes that blinked in slow sequence. Amy held up a piece of fruit she had taken from the mess hall. Apple, she said clearly. This is an apple. Juvenile tilted its head to one side. Its sensory frills extended slightly, tasting the air between them. A pool, it repeated. The sound emerged from vocal cords that had been designed by Nexari scientists to produce terrifying shrieks on the battlefield. Instead, the voice was soft and uncertain, like a child learning to speak for the first time. A pool. Amy felt tears prick at her eyes, and she did not entirely understand why. Something about that small, hesitant voice reaching across the barrier. between them, touched a place in her heart she had forgotten existed.
Ice.
Yes, she whispered. That is right, Apple. Apple, the juvenile said again, more confident this time. Apple. Behind the juvenile, the largest of the specimens watched the exchange with unblinking intensity. Amy had started calling her matron in her notes, but she had no idea if the synths had gender in any meaningful biological sense. Matron was twice the size of the others, with scales that held a deep protective purple color. She had positioned herself as guardian of the group from the moment they came aboard the Starfall. Every time Amy approached the containment area, Matron would move to stand between her and the smaller specimens. Every time Amy retreated, Matron would relax slightly, but never fully let down her guard. Today was different. Today Matron was watching, but not interfering. Something had changed in the hours Amy had spent sitting on the floor and speaking softly through the barrier. Something had shifted in the silent calculation happening behind those four ancient eyes. Slowly and carefully, Amy reached through the barrier and placed the apple on the floor of the containment chamber. Every synth in the room went still. 12 creatures held their breath and watched. The small red fruit sitting on the metal floor, like it was the most important object in the universe. The juvenile looked back at Matron. Some communication passed between them that Amy could not perceive. A flicker of color across scales. A subtle movement of sensory frills. Then Matron dipped her great head in what could only be a nod of permission. The juvenile crept forward on 6 delicate legs. Its claws clicked softly against the floor. Those claws could tear through combat armor. They could rip a human apart in seconds. Instead, they wrapped gently around the apple and lifted it with the care of someone handling something precious. Beyond measure, the juvenile did not eat the apple. Instead, it carried the fruit back to the group and offered it to Matron first. Matron took a small bite and passed it to the next largest. Synth, that one took a bite and passed it along. The apple traveled through all 12 specimens, each taking only a small piece, until it returned at last to the juvenile. The youngest ate what remained, which was barely a mouthful. They shared it. All 12 of them, passing fragments from one to another. The juvenile eating last and least. Amy pressed her hand against her mouth to hold back a sob. These creatures had been starving when the Starfall found them. They had been eating maintenance drones to survive. And when given real food for the first time in months, their first instinct was to share it with their family. She reached for her communication unit with trembling fingers. Commander Grant, I need you to see this. Lisa arrived 10 minutes later. She found Amy still sitting on the floor with the containment barrier now lowered entirely. The juvenile had crept closer during that time and was pressed against Amy's side, while Amy's hand rested gently on its smooth-scaled head. The creature made a sound that could only be described as purring. Jesus Christ, Amy, Lisa breathed. They are not weapons, Amy said without looking up. Her voice was thick with emotion. They were made to be weapons, but that is not what they are. They are children, Lisa, frightened and starving children who were locked in a room and left to die by the only parents they ever knew. They were engineered to kill us. Every cell in their bodies was designed for human extinction. And we were evolved to kill each other. We spent 100,000 years murdering our own kind over territory and resources and the color of our skin. Amy finally raised her eyes to meet her commander's gaze. That does not mean we have to keep doing it. That does not mean murder is all we are capable of. Lisa watched the juvenile nuzzle against Amy's palm. She watched Matron's scales shift from protective purple to something softer and warmer. She watched 11 other synths relax their postures for the first time since coming aboard, their colors rippling with gentle greens and peaceful blues. The termination order, Lisa said quietly. I know. I would have to lie in my report. Say they died of malnutrition before we could carry out the order. Command would never know the truth. Amy stroked the juvenile's head and felt it press closer against her side. Could you live with that lie? Lisa thought about the war. She thought about duty and honor and the chain of command that had defined her entire adult life. She thought about all the terrible calculus of survival that had brought. humanity to this moment in history. Then she thought about the juvenile purring softly against Amy's side. She thought about 12 starving creatures sharing a single apple. She thought about Matron's eyes and the hope she had seen there on the first day. "I think," Lisa said slowly, "I could live with it better than the alternative." Amy smiled through her tears. The juvenile lifted its head and looked at Lisa with 4 luminescent eyes full of something that might have been gratitude. "I have been calling her Pip." Lisa knelt down beside them and extended her hand toward the small creature called Pip. After a moment of hesitation, Pip pressed her smooth head against Lisa's palm and purred. "Hello, Pip," Lisa whispered. "Welcome to the family." 6 months had passed since the Starfall rescued 12 dying creatures from a forgotten research station, and in that time, the universe aboard the ship had changed completely. Lieutenant Chris Park had started the naming, though he would deny responsibility if anyone asked him directly. He was a young officer with an easy smile and a habit of talking to himself while he worked. Commander Grant had assigned him to assist Dr. Sullivan with the specimen's daily care. And on his 3rd day of duty, he had grown frustrated with referring to them by numbers. "Specimen 7. Come here," he had called out while preparing their food. "Specimen 7. Stop climbing on that." "Specimen 7. Get down from there right now." The smallest juvenile had ignored every command. She had continued scaling the cargo containers with cheerful determination, her scales flashing bright yellow with amusement. Chris had planted his hands on his hips and glared up at her. "You," he said firmly. "You are Pip now." "Pip, get down here!" The juvenile had frozen. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she processed the sound. Then her scales rippled with excited blues and she scrambled down the containers so fast she nearly fell. She pressed against Chris's legs and made that strange purring sound that Amy had first documented weeks before. "Pip," the juvenile repeated in her soft, hissing voice. Pip. Pip is Pip. The name stuck. After that, the crew could not help themselves. Matron became officially Matron, spoken with the respect and reverence the title deserved. She was the leader of the group, the protector, the one who made decisions and settled disputes. When crew members addressed her, they found themselves standing a little straighter and speaking a little more formally. She had that effect on people. The 2nd largest synth was a territorial male with crimson accent scales that flared bright red. Whenever someone entered his space without permission, the engineering team dubbed him Red after he developed a fascination with the ship's power systems. He would spend hours watching the plasma conduits pulse with energy, his scales shifting through colors that seemed to mirror the flow of power through the ship. Chief Engineer Sam Torres eventually started explaining the systems to him, and within a week, Red was identifying maintenance problems before the diagnostic computers detected them. The 3 adolescents, who moved as a single, coordinated unit, earned the nickname Trio from the security team. They went everywhere together, ate together, slept together, and seemed to communicate through some silent language of color and movement that humans could not perceive. Where one went, the other 2 followed. Where one looked the other, 2 turned. They were 3 bodies sharing one purpose, and that purpose was usually mischief. The remaining 6 synths collected names more slowly. There was Shadow, a quiet female who preferred dark corners and watched everything with patient, ancient eyes. There was Bright, whose scales held more luminescent cells than the others and glowed softly in dim lighting. There was Echo, who could mimic human voices with unsettling perfection. There was Storm, whose colors shifted rapidly when she was emotional, creating patterns like lightning across her scales. There was Gentle, the most timid of the group, who hid behind Matron whenever strangers approached. And there was Scout, who had appointed himself the explorer of the ship and knew every corridor and compartment. Better than most of the crew, Dr. Amy Sullivan documented everything. "They are learning faster than I can teach them," she reported to Commander Grant during their weekly briefing. Her tablet was filled with notes and observations and behavioral analyses that grew longer every day. Pip is already constructing basic sentences. Her vocabulary has expanded to over 300 words. Red figured out how to operate the cargo lift yesterday without any instruction from the engineering team. He watched Sam do it once and then repeated the process perfectly. Lisa leaned back in her chair. And Matron? Amy's face softened into a strange smile. Matron has started teaching the others. Whatever I show her, she passes on to the group within hours. I taught her the names of the rooms on Deck 5 last week. By the end of the day, every synth on the ship knew them. She has become their teacher, their guide, their link to understanding this new world they find themselves in. They are communicating that efficiently, more efficiently than we realized. Their color patterns carry complex meaning. Their sensory frills can detect chemical signals we cannot perceive. They have developed their own language alongside the human words they are learning. Amy paused and looked at her notes. Commander, these beings were designed as solitary hunters. The Nexari intended them to work alone, to stalk and kill without support or companionship. Instead, they have independently developed a cooperative society wit. Social structures and conflict resolution and resource-sharing protocols. They have rules, Lisa. Rules they created themselves and enforce within their group. Lisa absorbed this information slowly. Through her office window, she could see Pip playing in the corridor with Chris Park. They were batting a ball back and forth while Pip made sounds that were starting to resemble human laughter. Her scales flashed with happy yellows and excited blues. And Chris was grinning like a proud father watching his child take her first steps. We are 3 weeks from Earth, Lisa said finally. I know. Command is expecting us to report 12 terminated biological weapons. They think we incinerated them 6 months ago. That is what I told them. Amy nodded slowly. I know. Instead, we are going to arrive at Earth with 12 intelligent aliens who were bred to destroy humanity. And we are going to have to explain why we let them live. Why we lied. Why we disobeyed direct orders from Admiral Harrison himself. Yes, Amy met her commander's eyes without flinching. But I have been preparing for that. Cognitive assessments, behavioral analyses, communication transcripts, social development reports, everything I can think of to prove they are not a threat. I have 6 months of documented evidence showing that these beings are capable of kindness and loyalty and love. The Council will have to listen. Will it be enough? I do not know. Amy's voice wavered slightly, but she did not look away. But Pip learned a new word yesterday. She learned the word family. She pointed at the other synths first, then at me, then at Chris, then at the viewport showing the stars. And she said family. She said, we are all family now. Amy blinked back the moisture gathering in her eyes. Commander, I do not think I could live with myself if I let them take that away from her. If I let them take it away from any of them. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the war that had defined her career. She thought about duty and sacrifice and the heavy weight of command. She thought about Admiral Harrison and the Council and the mountain of regulations she had. Already broken, then she thought about Pip learning to laugh. She thought about Red helping the engineering team. She thought about Matron teaching her family to understand the strange humans who had saved them from the dark. You are going to present your case to the United Earth Council yourself, Lisa said at last. I will arrange the hearing. I will stand beside you when you speak. And if they decide to punish us for what we have done, then at least we will have tried. Amy smiled through her tears. Thank you, Commander. Outside the office window, Pip caught the ball and held it up triumphantly. Her scales blazed with joy. Chris cheered and clapped his hands. 3 weeks too. Earth. 3 weeks to prepare. The most important presentation in human history. Lisa watched Pip celebrate her small victory and hoped it would not be her last. The council chamber was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded. Completely. Dr. Amy Sullivan stood at the witness podium in the center of a vast circular room. 15 representatives from humanity's governing body sat in elevated seats that curved around her like the walls of an arena. Behind them, approximately 300 observers filled the gallery, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear and hostility. News cameras floated silently overhead, broadcasting every moment to billions of viewers across human space. Amy had never felt so small in her entire life, Behind her, visible through a transparent containment barrier that the council had insisted upon, sat Matron and Pip. The two synths had volunteered to attend the hearing as representatives of their kind. The others had remained aboard the Starfall under the watchful guard of Commander Grant and her crew. If things went badly today, Lisa had orders to run. She would take the synths and disappear into the outer territories where the council's authority grew thin. It was not much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. Council Chair Victor Kane leaned forward in his elevated seat. He was an older man with gray hair and cold eyes that had seen too many wars and made too many difficult decisions. His voice echoed through the chamber like a judge pronouncing sentence. Dr. Sullivan, you are asking us to believe that creatures specifically engineered to annihilate the human species should be granted protected status under the Sapient Rights Convention. Is that correct? Amy gripped the edges of the podium to steady her trembling hands. Yes, Councilman. That is correct. Despite the fact that their biological programming, their very DNA, was written with our extinction as its primary purpose. Their DNA also included enhanced neuroplasticity, heightened emotional capacity, and complex social bonding instincts. Amy activated her presentation display, and holographic data filled the air around her. Charts and graphs and brain scans and behavioral analyses floated in glowing light for everyone to see. The Nexery intended to create perfect killing machines. Instead, they accidentally created perfect adapters. Yes, the synths were programmed to hunt humans. They were also programmed to learn, to grow, to form connections. And when given the choice between their violent programming and their emotional connections, they chose connection. Every single time. Admiral Harrison stood from the military delegations section. He was the same man who had ordered the synths destroyed 7 months ago. His face was red with barely contained anger. With respect, Dr. Sullivan, we have no guarantee that choice will hold. What happens when these creatures encounter their original targets in a less controlled environment? What happens when instinct overrides affection? What happens when one of them snaps and tears apart a schoolyard full of children? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gallery. Amy saw fear on the faces of the observers. She understood that fear. She had felt it herself once. Admiral, may I call Pip to the podium? The chamber fell silent. Council Chair Kane hesitated for a long moment, his cold eyes studying Amy's face. Then he nodded slowly. The synth designated Pip may approach. The containment barrier will remain active. Amy turned and walked to the transparent barrier. Pip was pressed against the energy field, her scales shifting through anxious grays and nervous purples. Matron stood behind her with one protective limb resting on Pip's shoulder. It is okay, Amy said softly. I will be right here with you. Just tell them the truth. Pip's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Then she straightened her body, and her scales shifted to determined blues. She slithered through the small gate that Amy opened in the barrier and positioned. Herself beside the podium, 300 humans held their breath. News cameras zoomed closer. Somewhere in the galaxy, billions of viewers watched a creature built to kill them stand before their leaders and prepare to speak. Pip, Amy said gently, can you tell the council how you feel about humans? Pip's sensory frills extended slightly as she tasted the air of the chamber. So many humans. So many heartbeats and breathing patterns and chemical signatures. Her programming identified each one as a target. Her heart identified each one as a potential friend. Humans found Pip, she said. Her voice was soft and slightly hissing, but every word was clear. The chamber's audio systems carried her speech to every corner of the room. Pip was in dark place. Pip was hungry. Pip was scared. Pip thought Pip would die in dark place like others died. She paused and her scales rippled with remembered pain, and humans came. Humans opened doors. Humans brought light. Humans fed Pip when Pip was hungry. Humans gave Pip words. Humans gave Pip name. Humans gave Pip family. Pip turned to look at the assembled representatives. Her 4 eyes moved across their faces one by one. Some looked away. Others met her gaze with wonder. Pip was made to hurt humans. Pip knows this. Pip feels it sometimes like itch under scales. Voice in head that says hunt and kill and destroy. Her scales flickered with brief reds before settling back to calm blues. But hurting family is wrong. Pip knows this too. Pip knows it's stronger than itch. Pip knows it deeper than voice. Pip chooses this. Pip chooses family. Pip loves family. Chamber was absolutely silent. Amy stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. The synths were engineered with human recognition protocols. Those protocols were meant to identify targets for elimination. Instead, in the absence of violence, they became the foundation for bonding. The synths recognize us the way they were meant to. Yes. They recognize us as special, as important, as central to their existence. The Nexari intended that recognition to drive murder. In practice, it drives love. She looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's leaders. These beings were created to be our enemies, but creation does not determine destiny. The synths have chosen who they want to be. They have chosen to be our friends. They have chosen to be our family. I am asking this council to honor that choice. I am asking you to prove that humanity is defined not by what we were evolved to do, but by what we choose to do instead. Pip pressed against Amy's leg and purred softly. The sound carried through the silent chamber. Councilwoman Maria Vasquez spoke up from the humanitarian delegation. Her voice was thick with emotion. And what would honoring that choice look like specifically, Dr. Sullivan? Protected sapient status, integration pathways into human society, the right to live and learn and grow alongside us. Amy paused and drew a deep breath. And perhaps most importantly, rescue missions. The Nexari abandoned their synth project, but our intelligence suggests there may be other specimens at other facilities. Other frightened, starving children locked in dark rooms and waiting to die. I am asking you to help us save them. Admiral Harrison rose again. You want us to save the weapons built to destroy us. I want us to be better than the Nexari. Amy met his eyes without flinching. I want us to prove that we deserve to survive this war. Not because we are stronger or smarter or more ruthless, but because we are kinder. Because when we found frightened children in the dark, we chose to help them instead of destroy them. Pip looked up at Amy and then at the council. Please, she said softly. Please let Pip keep family. Please let Pip live. The council voted 7 hours later. The motion passed 12-3. Pip learned a new word that day. The word was hope. 10 years had passed since the Starfall's first contact with the synths, and the universe looked very different now. Ambassador. Matron stood before the Galaxy Council in a chamber far grander than the one where Pip had first spoken to humanity. This room held representatives from 17 spacefaring species, not just humans. Bright lights illuminated delegations from across the known galaxy. Translators hummed softly as dozens of languages flowed through the air. News drones from 100 worlds captured every moment for audiences that numbered in the trillions. Matron's scales rippled with the confident golds and steady purples of authority. She had grown into her role over the past decade. The frightened protector who had guarded her starving family in a dark research station had become a diplomat, a leader, a voice for her entire species. Behind her stood a delegation of 37 synths, representing the interests of their growing community. They had come from Earth and Mars and the orbital colonies and the frontier settlements where synths now lived and worked alongside humans. To her left, Dr. Amy Sullivan smiled with barely contained pride. She was older now, with gray streaks in her hair and lines around her eyes. But she still looked at Matron and the other synths with the same wonder she had felt that first day in the containment chamber. Her official title was Special Advisor on Synth-Human Relations. But everyone knew she was really just a proud mother watching her children change the world. The synth community formally requests sanctions against the Nexari research program, Matron said. Her voice carried icily through the vast chamber, strong and clear and unwavering. We do not make this request out of anger or vengeance. The act of our creation, however violent in its intent, gave us life. We do not curse our existence. We are grateful to be alive. She paused and let her gaze travel across the assembled representatives. We request sanctions for abandonment. For the 14 facilities we have now located where our kindred were left to starve in darkness. For the systematic disposal of sapient beings as though we were malfunctioning equipment to be thrown away when no longer useful. The Nexari created thinking, feeling beings and then discarded us like broken tools. That is the crime we ask this council to address. The Nexari delegate shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His species had lost the war with humanity 3 years ago. Their empire had crumbled, and their military had been dismantled. They attended the Galaxy Council now as a diminished power, stripped of influence and respect. But they still had not acknowledged what they had done to the synths. They still had not apologized. The synth community does not seek vengeance, Matron continued. We seek recognition. We seek rescue for those of our kind who remain imprisoned in forgotten facilities. And we seek a formal acknowledgement from our creators that we are more than what they made us to be. We are not weapons. We are not tools. We are people. We deserve to be treated as such. Admiral Lisa Grant watched from the human delegations section. She wore the insignia of Fleet Admiral now, the highest rank in the Earth Defense Force. Her hair had turned silver, and her face carried the weight of command. But her eyes still held the same determination that had driven her to defy orders and save 12 dying creatures a decade ago. Beside her sat Chris Park. He was no longer a young lieutenant, but a captain with his own ship and his own crew. His hand was intertwined with that of his wife Karen, civilian engineer he had met at a synth integration conference 5 years ago. Karen had fallen in love with Chris partly because of the way he talked about Pip, the way his whole face lit up when he described teaching her to play catch in the corridors of the Starfall and resting her head on. Karen's shoulder was Pip herself. She was no longer a juvenile. 10 years of growth had transformed her into a fully mature adult synth, graceful and strong and beautiful in ways that still made Chris's heart ache with pride. Her scales shimmered with peaceful blues and content greens. She still purred when Chris scratched behind her sensory frills, still called him and Karen her family, still visited them whenever her duties as a synth community liaison brought her to Earth. The Galaxy Council debated for 3 days representatives from species that had never encountered. The synths asked questions about their biology and their psychology and their social structures. Representatives from species that had suffered under Nexari aggression spoke in favor of the sanctions. The Nexari delegate offered weak excuses and hollow justifications. That convinced no one. On the 4th day, the sanctions passed unanimously. On the 5th day, the Nexari Collective released the locations of all remaining synth facilities scattered across their former territory, 18 stations. Over 200 synths still alive. Still waiting. Still hoping that someone would come. On the 6th day, rescue ships launched from 12 human colonies. The crews were mixed teams of humans and synths working together, sharing meals and jokes and stories as they traveled into the void. They carried food and medicine and warm blankets. They carried hope. On the 7th day, Matron returned to the Starfall. The old ship hung in Earth's orbit now, preserved as a museum and memorial to the first contact between humans and synths. Schoolchildren visited every week to learn about the 12 frightened creatures who had been rescued from darkness and the brave humans who had defied orders to save them. The cargo bay where Amy had first lowered the containment barrier had been preserved exactly as it was, complete with holographic recreations of that historic moment. Amy found Matron standing alone in that cargo bay, her scales shifting through soft colors of memory and reflection. Having second thoughts about your speech? Amy asked gently. Matron's scales rippled with quiet amusement. Having first memories. This is where I decided to trust you. This is where I learned that creators do not always determine what their creations become. This is where my people began to transform into something new. Amy moved to stand beside her oldest friend. We were so afraid of you in those first days. I was afraid. We were afraid of ourselves. Matron turned her great head to look at the woman who had changed everything. We knew what we were made for. We knew the hunger and the instinct and the dark voice that whispered kill. We did not know if we could be anything else. You showed us that we could. You showed yourselves. I just opened the door. And thank you for opening the door, Amy. Thank you for seeing children where others saw monsters. Thank you for offering an apple to creatures designed to tear you apart. Matron's scales warmed to deep purples of love and gratitude. Thank you for giving us a chance to become a family. They stood together in the cargo bay as the Earth turned slowly outside the viewport. Human and synth. Rescuer and rescued. Two people whose first meeting should have ended in violence, but had somehow become the beginning of something beautiful. Somewhere, out in the vast darkness of space, rescue ships carried hope toward frightened children who had been locked away and forgotten. Those ships would reach them soon. Those ships would open the doors and bring light into the darkness, and offer food and kindness to creatures who had known only abandonment. The Nexari had engineered the synths to destroy humanity. Humanity had adopted them as companions instead. And in the end, that made all the difference.